Welcome to our podcast.
It's not prod.
I can't.
It's a pod.
I think I need to speak language mythologies right about now.
Let's try that one again.
Hello, SLPs. Welcome to True Confessions with Lisa and Sarah. Okay, can start confessing now. This is so cheesy.
Hi, Sarah.
Well, hi, Lisa.
How you doing today?
Good. I like how we just mixed it up and you started this one.
Do you think anyone but you noticed that?
Yeah. I think everybody was like, wait, Sarah usually says hi, Lisa first.
I'm pretty sure you might be the only one on earth. But I'm really excited that got you real jazzed.
Yeah,
to change it up like that.
We're just really shaking things up around here.
Well, I'm going to tell you, we've really shaken it up.
Yeah.
Because we have somebody new in the confessional.
And a dude.
What?
No.
Seriously. Like, that's where it's like not only do we have a guest live and in person, but he's part of the 3% of SLPs that are not female. Right? Is it 3%?
I don't know.
Research says it's 3%, but that statistic was completely made up just now.
We like to randomly just throw things in front, like where you just say research says, and everybody just believes it if you just say research says. Mm-hmm. So research says only 3% of SLPs are male.
I believe it.
I don't think it's that small.
What was your grad class like?
I had two.
There you go.
You had 2 grad classes and you are in
Two
SLP?
dudes. 2 guys in the class out of 50. So I think the number's really small. But anyway, we found one. It's like a unicorn, and here he is.
I'm here.
So let's introduce him.
Okay.
This is Doug Cutler.
Woo! I know, and it's always amazing that we convince anyone to come and do this with us. But we were really excited Doug agreed to do this. Because 1, we really like him, and 2, he's super smart, and I think this episode is going to be so helpful to a lot of people. So thanks for coming.
I'm happy to be here. I hope it's all that and more.
Yeah, I think it will be. I think it's going to be a treat. So welcome, Doug. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am a speech pathologist here in Phoenix, working for public schools, doing assistive technology solely as the AT specialist in the district. We are the largest district in Arizona, so it's huge, and it's a little bit different, I think, than what most people who are AAC specialists are doing, because you are working with a large district and a lot of departments. So
the resources are big, but then sometimes it's almost like the government, where even though there are a lot of resources, there are a lot of sometimes red tape involved in because the process, you have to have processes when you have a district that's so big. Right. So that's actually how we all met. We all worked in the same district together. And so we've gotten to work with you on that kind of personal level too, and know your awesomeness from that. Yeah.
And I think, like you were saying, because there are districts so large, and our last podcast we did with Ann Page on AAC, we really focused on those students with complex communication needs. I thought about it after I listened to it, and I love that episode, and there was a lot of great things shared. But that's just one tiny piece of the puzzle.
That's true.
Assistive technology is obviously involved in a variety of ways, and you do it all.
Yes.
You're not just working with speech pathologists, right?
No. We work with special educators and aides and parents, obviously teachers. But, we're also working with other departments, and especially in the last few, I don't know how many years, I think one of the things that gets lost, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds here because I know, not everyone wants to be an AT specialist or has that inclination, but I think what does get lost is the history of AAC and kind of what that looks like now and what that entails. So, we were talking few years ago even, you had your device company and you had your specific device and this is what it did, and it was solely for voice output and that was it. And, it allowed us to be very self-reliant. I could be a speech pathologist with some AAC knowledge and know how to use a voice output device. And maybe my skill was in how to figure out what voice output device fit in what situation and things like that. But now, we're working with tablets and a lot of, we're working within a system, as you said, Lisa, where we've got other departments to deal with too. So now we're working with firewalls, we're working with ed tech, we're working with information systems, we're working with internet access. It's become quite different in the last few years, I'd say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or even something as simple as how can you get apps on an iPad and how does it belong to a district versus an individual iPad and one user?
Well, heck, when I first set up an iPad, I figured, well, I'll get an iPad and we'll get, Proloquo on it and start going here and see what happens. And so I set it up, sure, with my iTunes account. Why not? That sounds smart. Why not do that? And got it out there. Was thinking I was doing this great thing. Got it out to a student that I'm like, this is gonna work for him. He'll be my test case. We'll see how all this goes. And all of a sudden my emails are all screwy, and I'm like, what is going on here?
Then your live photo stream showed up
Yeah,
on an
exactly.
iPad, and
I'm
you're like, oh, I'm fired.
Like, what the heck is going on? I've got work emails that are going out to people I don't know. But yeah, it turns out, sure, you can set up an iPad with your own personal iTunes account, and everything else gets linked into it, including your Gmail and
I saw a
everything
movie
else
about
that
that
was
one.
associated
Oh,
with
man.
it. So, yeah, it was.
Things have changed.
You know what? Learning curve, though.
Yep.
And I think that's the great thing about assistive tech and AAC. And I heard you guys talk about it before, that you have to get in there and do it.
Yeah.
There's no cookbook for it. And I think that's what's different about AAC, and that's what's fun about it.
Yeah. I have always been very interested in it, but it also terrifies me. That's what we talked about on that last podcast, is the fear. And because we personally have worked together, we just had a really interesting conversation about this last week, is Doug is probably one of the nicest people on the planet. If you don't know him, sorry, that sucks for you.
You're lost.
You're lost. He's just such a good guy. And I always knew I could call him if I needed anything. And I think internally I knew I could probably ask the dumbest question in the world and wouldn't be judged.
Absolutely.
But because we all have this insecurity that, well, I'm a school-based or I'm a speech pathologist, I should know this. And so I never wanted to be found out just how AAC dumb I was. And so I wasted all of this time not on my ego, not calling you. And I'm sad now because I think you could have taught me so many things.
I think it's funny because coming from my perspective, I am terrified to step into your guys' shoes and go back into a classroom after doing this for 20 years. It's like, I'm sure my professors wouldn't want to hear this. I don't know if I'm a speech pathologist anymore. I don't know what I am. If I'm IS, ed tech, if I'm a special educator. What I know I'm not really good at anymore is, let's go in and work with an Artic kid or some fluency. Like, I'd be coming up to people saying, what do I do? Where do I start?
Yeah.
I think that's anybody that specializes, though. I think you start to get so focused on that one area that you become an expert in that. And so that happened with somebody else in actually the district that we worked in that was in a specialized role and then kind of transitioned into a more school-based role. And she was like, Lisa, I need to learn how to be an SLP again. So you need to help me, because it's a different set of expectations when you're working in a more traditional school-based role. And the generalized caseload and all of that, you kind of have to know a little bit about everything versus when you're just focusing on, a lot about your area, but you know a lot about that. So you're able to take that and generalize it to a lot of different students, but it's just a different skill set.
Well, it was really powerful when you said that to me.
I think what's great
when
is that
when you
I
just
have
made
that
that comment.
background.
Yeah. Because it made me realize, here you know that you're not going to be comfortable walking into a school-based SLP's role, and that you've kind of lost maybe some of those skills that you once had because of your new focus, made me realize I have got to break down these walls. Like, I don't know why any of us are hesitating to reach out to experts and specialists and get help, and know that they in return would be asking us for help if the situation was reversed.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing is that, when you do ask for help, I don't care what the profession is or what the specialty is. I'm walking into your classroom. I'm walking into your realm. I'm walking into your speech room. It's not, by all means, the last thing I want to do is walk in and tell someone how to do something, where to do it, that they're doing something wrong, especially. If I'm doing my job appropriately, I'm in there, we're giving knowledge, we figured out a system, some kind of support, whatever, and hopefully nothing's changed on the surface. And I think that's where people get stuck a little bit, is that, I've got to do something different. I've got to do something, out of the box because this kid has AAC or AT or whatever it is. And the reality is if we do our job right, it should be seamless. If there's something you're noticing, we're on the wrong language system, we're not prompting and cueing appropriately, something's gone awry there.
I think that same principle applies. So if you think about like even us reaching out to you and connecting with you and having that fear, it's kind of that same principle. Like even a general education teacher, we're a specialist to them. So imagine if they were nervous to connect with us to tap into what we know about communication skills, and same thing. We would never want to go into a general education classroom and start telling them what they're doing wrong. Everybody has this unique set of skills and this unique, perspective on what they're doing, and it really should all be, you pull from that.
Well, that's the
to
post
do what's
we
best
did.
For the kid,
yeah, that's what
for
the post
kid.
we did on Instagram last week. We are all in this together. We really have to break these walls down and start openly communicating and saying, here's where I need help, or here's where I can offer help. Or, we've got to just break those walls down, because I think it is a problem in all of our fields. Our sole focus is on the student. And that means that we come together and do what's best for students, and no one person is a stronger member of a team. But
no,
yeah.
And I think that may have even served me well to be so engrossed in what I do that it's like, okay, I would definitely need a refresher course or two, or how to get back into an SLP's role. But you know what? The other thing is I don't hide that. When we talk language development and language development relevant to AAC, I throw those questions out there. Hey, what do you think? Where do you think this student is developmentally, cognitively? I throw it out to teachers that way as well. Talk to me about your curriculum. What does it look like? Again, if we do things right, this ought to be a seamless transition. This shouldn't be something where, okay, I'm going to do something different for this one kid that's participating in this full classroom. It's not what we're going for.
That is a huge thing.
I was going to say, and we're going to get into this, I hope, a little bit more later too, but that was also something I learned from you, is this is just their output.
Yes.
Nothing else is changing. And so when we talk about, doing AAC assessments and writing AAC goals and doing AAC therapy.
There's not AAC time.
Yeah.
It's
right.
built into their day. It's not that we just set aside time. That would be like setting aside time to just communicate or to learn. Like there is, it has to be built in.
Yeah. So you're saying if we find the right support for that student, there really shouldn't be this huge learning curve, because it should just blend into what they're doing every day, but now is giving them access.
Right.
Okay.
And I think what ends up happening is, we want to do instinctively, we want to do activities, we want to do like, oh, I want this, student to learn X, Y, or Z, and we're going to do this activity around it. And, especially in a school-based setting, our activities are right there. It's the curriculum. Let's work with our teachers to pull stuff out of that curriculum. Now we can pre-teach it in a therapy room if that's what we want to do, something like that. But this notion of teaching our students something, completely different off of this tangent because we think it's right or it feels good to us, or I know you guys were talking about colors at one point. We really want this kid to learn green. Well, it's kind of a dumb example, but if he's not learning green anywhere else, that's just one aspect, and we know our kids need so much repetition, and our kids need a lot of repetition with AAC. Why not make it something that's relevant to them, something that can generalize, something where they're going to get more practice outside of just you?
So, and I think we talked about this with Anne too. So the idea then is whatever it is that we're working on. Now we've just included this device or whatever support that we're providing with the student. And so where do we start? I think that's everyone's biggest hang up. How do we start? This is new to them. We've introduced this new output device or whatever it is. And then what? We model.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Modeling's a lost piece of this. But I think, the funny thing is, and I'm going to go a little bit different from what was said on the other podcast with Anne, I think she did an excellent job of talking about what happens in a classroom and things like that. I'm going to support her from the backside of things, because for me, what I'm always looking for are systems. And we always talk about those kids that do walk in with communication devices and they have this high-tech device and so forth. When I look at it, I'm looking at it from the perspective of there's 80 schools out there with kids we have kids in preschool, we have kids that are in high school. So everything becomes individualized as far as where that student is, where they're going, where they're at cognitively, the environment they're in, gosh, what teacher they're with, what program they're with, what curriculum they're using. All of that really plays some sort of role in there. So taking your question again, going back to the basics of it, I might be working with a student in a preschool and I'm doing activity boards and printouts, looking at specific language, and even incorporating some of those core words. So really, it does depend where your students are. And I always go back to Joy Zavala and the SET framework, where we're looking at, she is specifically student, environment, task, and tools. And it's always been used as more of an evaluative framework, but it's also great for ongoing assessments, just to kind of
If you know where they're at, to know where you're taking them.
Exactly. And it allows you to look at, okay, here's the student, here's where they're at cognitively, whether you're at a baseline assessment or whether this is a reeval. And then, what tasks have changed over time, over the years, even over the course of weeks that this kid's being asked to address. But all of that becomes a system. And even, we could go talking about specific communication devices and things like that, but the reality is, what I'm looking for is, if we've got a kid on such and such core word device, how great would it be for them to have started on a paper-based display with some of that same language, so you ease that transition. So I think having those short-term and long-term goals become really, really important, and just having that perspective. It doesn't all have to be written down, but just having an idea.
What helps them? Why does the paper to device, helps make that connection for them?
We used to be that every kid had to start with paper-based overlays, and there was this progression up through AAC, and that's not necessarily true anymore. But we were just in a preschool classroom working with students, and we took some of the editing software and just printed off the pages that are in what would be a communication device.
Just to show some of those foundational skills, readiness for a device?
You know what? What it allowed us to do, actually, is just give the kids something immediate and that had some structure to it. So, as much as I like BoardMaker and things like that, sometimes our teachers or SLPs are, time constrained or a little bit intimidated about using it. Maybe they don't have access. Some of that editing software is free, and you can download that and then just print off a page and be able to implement it right away. If you have a student that does well, you know where you're going. It can also be cut up into individual symbols as well if you're at a little bit lower level. But I think the other thing that you guys talked about in your other podcast that was so important, and the part that does remain fairly consistent throughout AAC, is core words. You've got your core words right there. They're readily accessible. You don't have to go to another book. You don't have to go to another person. There it is. Print it off. Start using it. It's systematic. As the student moves up, you can move up with them. So,
yeah, I like that. I like what you said. Just I think we all hesitate to get started because it's like, I got to wait for the AAC eval.
Right.
I need the eval, and then I need the specialist to come in and decide the device, and I need to do it. And so we wait. We just wait. Instead of we could just print that off, get going, try some things. The question I think that comes up a lot too are symbols. And there's such a variety of different types of, the images are different,
or
the displays are different,
white.
the location of buttons are different, some things are grouped by different ways. Is there an easy answer to this? How do you know which one?
Or how many?
Yeah, exactly. There's really not, but I do go back to still the SET framework and really looking at, okay, here's our student, here's what they're able to do. Cognitively, I go back to a lot of the testing that you guys as speech pads have probably already done, and you've done an expressive one word, you've done a Goldman-Fristo. Where is this student? And you get a pretty good idea of where they need to be. So I think, a lot of times that stuff gets discounted. Like, oh my gosh, we're starting new, we went into AAC. no, that stuff is so supportive of what we're going to end up looking at. And, going into assessment, there is no formal assessment for AAC. There's nothing that's going to give you something that's going to say, all right, I checked this box, this is where this kid is at. I checked this box, this is where this kid is at. He needs to be on a low tech, or this kid needs to be on a high tech system. There's nothing that'll give you a brand name, you know what I mean? And I think that's where people get caught up too, is they want this recipe of how to do AAC, and that's not really it. I mean, you hate to say it's trial and error. We do have a starting point, and you're hoping that the information you've gathered leads you to a right place, or a great starting point. But the reality is those things are going to be tweaked. And if you got an AAC user that's going to be on this for long term, it'll be tweaked again and again and again, and it'll never be perfect. But it'll be that kid's system.
I think that just gave so many people like a time to just like go when you said that, because I do think we think there should be something that's guiding these decisions, like that we just don't know it.
Right.
I've been missing something all these years, like I should know which system is the best and which one's more appropriate for this student, but there really isn't an answer.
There really isn't. There's there are systems that work. There are there's trial, there's error, there's what works in this environment versus that environment. If I've got a kid that's going to swim club, I'm not giving him a high-tech device. Doesn't mean he won't use one in his classroom where, that's a more appropriate setting for it, but maybe he has a paper backup for the pool.
Yeah,
Things
it's
like
laminated.
That. So that
Right.
environment, yeah, exactly. So that environment piece plays a huge role in it. And then again, your task, what is this kid being able to ask to do? And I think you take the student and their abilities, and then you look at the tasks that they're being asked to do, and there has to be some middle ground there somewhere.
Yeah.
But that's what's so cool. I think, again, thinking of core words and looking at where we can come in with our lens of what can we do with that kid. So even thinking of swim, that you can laminate that for there, or even having the swim coach with a lanyard and having those symbols laminated on their neck. I mean, there are ways that we think of making this diversified kind of instruction for our students, all of our students, all the time. And it's one of those things we do naturally, whether you give yourself credit for it or not. But I think we kind of put up this stumbling block when it comes to AAC that we just sort of say, we don't know this, and this fear creeps in. But you do know this, people. You know language. And so you start with that. You start with what the student knows. You build on those strengths. You figure out this whole system of how they can show and use their language, so you know more than you think you do.
Yeah.
I think often.
Yeah.
And I think there are going to be different things that people have different access to. Also, districts have different access, parents have different access. But you know what? We can make it all work. There's, regardless of what the system is to a certain extent, you still have the basic principles of those targets that you want to hit, and how this kid is supposed to use it, or how the student is supposed to use it. But I think that's the difference, is you're not teaching AAC. You're not teaching the device. You're teaching language, like you said. Your goals should be language goals. They should be expression goals, not touch the button. Touch the button is a physical task. It's a skill, but it's not language.
So the big thing is the teams need to really figure out what the current communication strengths and needs are. And from there, they need to develop goals to support those needs. So what would be some typical kind of language that would support students who are using AAC? That would be more language driven versus student will touch a button.
No, I think it goes right back to those goals that you would create for any typical kid that you were working with. I think it goes back to your language delayed kids and the targets you're trying to hit. If you're expecting him to compose sentences that are comprised of grammatical markers like an appropriate pronoun and so forth, that's what we want with the AAC as well. You want that. All right, student's going to create a 2 to 3 word sentence. Now, the end of that goal might be given access to his AAC device. But, going into the IEP lingo here, someone should already have a really good idea of that student and a picture of that student before you ever get to your goals. So if in your present levels you're saying this is a student who's, nonverbal, he uses a high-tech communication system with 42 locations, he accesses it with his hands versus like a switch or something like that, I'm going into those goals down the line going, oh, that's right, I've got a kid who uses an AAC device. This is where he's at. He's able to pick out single nouns here and there, but we really want to use that core word and create a system. How can we get him to do that? Just like your students that would only be using one word and you're looking to expand MLU.
Yeah. I love that. You wrote a blog post for us a while back. I will reshare it on this podcast episode too, because it's one of the number one questions we get is, when are you going to add AAC goals to SLP Toolkit?
Oh, wow.
And so we always answer with, well, here's a blog post we think you should read, because we're not. Because there's not the goal. The goal isn't going to change. We're still targeting speech and language skills, but you may want to add the output.
Yes.
Of how the student is going to produce that response. That's okay to add to the goal. Right?
Absolutely.
But the goal is not to memorize all 42 buttons on their device.
Yeah, and notice we're not even talking about specific language systems. We're talking about where that student is at and what their language is comprised of. So, I would never, I guess in a present level, you can write what system they have, and they're using
because that's present level. That's currently
that's
right
happening
now.
right now.
Right.
Your goals being predictive. We don't know if that device is going to be there. Maybe the kid's doing fantastic, and we needed to just up his device for whatever reason. He was on a super talker. We need to get him up to something that's a little more dynamic than that because his vocabulary's expanded so much.
Or maybe he brings it to a swim lesson and drops it in
That's
the pool,
true.
and then you're screwed.
Yep.
So that's a good point to make. Maybe don't list the device.
Right.
Just say that they're using voice output or whatever they're working on.
But
Okay.
then that other piece too is the special considerations. There is that section in special considerations in your IEP that you list assistive technology. So you would want to put, if that student requires a device, maybe not a specific device,
Correct.
but if they require some sort of communication device in order to access their curriculum, that should be listed there, right?
Absolutely, and that allows someone like me to look at the present levels. If you told me that he's using, a high-tech device on a 42 location with 42 symbols basically, and he's able to navigate, and he's using, his general MLU is 3 to 5 words, something like that. Let's say that device does break. That device has to go back to the company. It's in for repair. Parents need to take care of it, whatever. That allows someone like me to figure out the resources in order to get this student something where he can get back and participate in curriculum again. I have a good idea of what we're looking for, what we need to put in place. So it serves that purpose as well to, not just say, oh, well, he had a device. We don't know what it was, and I'm not going to put in something that's not going to be effective for him.
What if I'm in a school district where I'm one of 3 SLPs and we don't have huge resources?
Or an
And
AT
and I
specialist.
inherit, right, and I inherit an IEP that says something like this, and I go to my SPED director, and if they say, well, we don't have funds for that.
There's a couple different resources, and I know that, number one, if it is a device that's made by a manufacturer like Prentke Romich, like Saltillo, someone like that, like a Tobii Dynavox, those guys are really supportive, and they want the kids to thrive. So, you know what, I would talk to, most of them have local representatives. If they don't have local rep, I'm sure they can put you in touch with someone that is able to help. The second part is that, and I'm not sure about all states, but I know that in our state we have a lending library through the state of Arizona that's run by Department of Ed, and they allow us access to certain devices. In fact, they have a wide repertoire here of devices that are available. So that's another resource where it's like, hey, you can go in, you can go through their loan library and at least borrow something for a month or something like that, just to kind of get things rolling. Getting a little in the weeds here, I think it comes down to, we're lucky.
Well, but if it's in the student's IEP though too, my answer to that too would be, that's not
We got to figure
my
it
problem.
out.
Right, we have to figure it
Yeah.
out. So unfortunately, you might get some of those responses sometimes, especially when districts are smaller and feel pressure like that. But there are resources that I think sometimes you don't know about, like that you just mentioned. So I always love one of Sarah's favorite, well, a couple of her favorite expressions: be resourceful, be a problem solver. There are a lot of resources out there. So a lot of times there are people at your Department of Ed that might have programs that can kind of point you in the right direction. So check into that. I loved your suggestion of checking in with the companies, because even if they can't directly, they might know of. I mean, they're out doing this kind of public outreach with districts and the Department
They may know
of Ed.
organizations
Right.
that have,
Absolutely.
you know,
true.
that have charitable, you know, resources where they're donating and things like that, right?
Yep. Again, being connected, being specialists within the field. We're lucky. We haven't necessarily had that problem, but I get it. The first reaction is to just start sweating, probably.
Just
You know,
and freeze.
oh my gosh,
and stand
when you
still. We
talk,
talk
Right.
about this all the time. We just stand still.
and isn't that a barrier in assistive tech, especially that for some reason there's still this stigma of like, oh my god, it costs money, don't talk about it. Like,
Right,
we're not
right.
going to say anything.
We don't want to be responsible for
Yep.
paying for it if we say the student needs it, but we
Yep.
always have to put the student's needs first. We are supposed to be their advocate.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, one thing I will say is typically the students on my caseload that would have benefited from assistive technology, I saw once a week. I was maybe in the room for an hour. So is that going to cut it, Doug? Is that going to cut it to get this kid a device, and then I'm going to trust everyone in the room to work on with him with the rest of the week, and then I'm only going to do my 30 minutes once a week?
No. But I
But is
think
that only
goes,
Sarah's responsibility?
you know what? No, it's a team responsibility, and in fact, that's one of the biggest reasons why I try to get the buy-in from our special educators and from our teachers, and really looking at, curriculum and how this kid is going to access curriculum. That's his practice. For the most part, we may be doing some refining in an individualized setting, but really, our curriculum is our stimulus. There are activities. You're going to see the most carryover, the most generalization when we've got the support of everyone on the team. The other thing is again, kind of like we talked about earlier, I want our teachers to be involved. And I don't want to be giving them, okay, this kid uses AAC, so we're going to do something completely different here. Here's how we're going to do it. No. Hey, let's talk about your curriculum. What does a day look like? What does his day look like in your classroom? How can we get him more involved? There, now we're on the right track. And I think putting it in a way where we're all on the same team, we're working for you and for the student, tends to get a little bit more of that buy-in versus, again, like we talked about in the beginning, someone barging into your room or your speech therapy room and saying, hey, this is how it works.
And then you point at them and you say, "You suck."
Yeah. That works.
Yeah, that was a helpful approach.
I know, because I do think that's one thing is, we talked about this in the last episode when we talked about AAC too, is I'm not going to be very beneficial to that student using their device to access whatever activity they're doing if I don't know it.
Absolutely.
Because I have sat down with students before and I thought, we're going to use your device today and we're
I'll
going
let
to
you just figure it
participate in
out.
the classroom. And so then the activity's happening and the student's not doing anything with their device. So I'm like, let me model. I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you how we do this. But I actually don't know where anything on that device is either. And so then I'm like, how are we going to say this? How are we going to say this today? So what do I do about that?
There's a couple of things, and one is, I know, right? If you want to learn it, you're going to pull that kid's device right away and take his voice right with you,
I'm going to take his
Yeah.
voice with me because I better memorize that because I can't model
Absolutely.
if I don't know how I'm going to say this with the buttons that I have.
You just let the kid figure it out.
Yeah.
That's what you do. You just watch. And then when they can't do it, you're like, "What's your problem?"
I know.
Show me.
I know.
I think a huge thing with that is going back to some of that editing software. If you're fortunate, I mean, we're talking about higher tech devices here, and if you're having trouble finding that vocabulary, that's what I'm assuming we're going with. So some of that editing software is just awesome. Like the Touch Chat app, you can download exactly what that student's device looks like onto your PC. And have that available to you. You're able to just scroll through pages, see Now, you won't have any individualized information like what friends or whatever that he put into his device, but you will have that core vocabulary and be able to see the actual categories that are in there. I think that's a huge underutilized tool that's available to people that they don't know about. PRC has the same thing. Even Dynavox, and you're able to download some of their software as well and see what is on these systems.
Yeah, and we know Cough Drop too.
Cough Drop as well.
We have met the individuals responsible for Cough Drop. He's such a great guy, and I love his story. But anyway, I've used his, and same thing. I have it on my computer, and then I can make the changes and do everything, and then update the app, which is awesome.
And I think the great thing about that is that then you're able to take that. Now, imagine printing off those pages.
Yeah, and
maybe,
you can do that in the
maybe
Cough
you
Drop
don't
app.
have a laptop. I don't know. You can print off those pages too and have that in front of you and use it as really low-tech modeling. But how great is that?
Yeah. But you have to know these devices you're working with.
You know what? You do, and at the same time, I will say this: when I go into a consult, when I go into, student has a device, what do I do with it? The first thing I'm not talking about is programming. The technical stuff, I really do, not even purposefully, but I will save it. Because the more important thing is, how are we prompting and cueing this student to participate in his environment? And when we're looking at a curricular environment, that tends to be the hard part. Going back to one of our preschool examples, it's like, how many of our students are constantly asked, what's this? What's this? And it's noun, noun, noun. And again, that's just what we're used to. But what if we flip that around? What if we say, tell me about this flamingo? And we talk about pink, and we talk about bird, and we talk about tall or skinny or, whatever it is, but that, those using those descriptive words. I could have described the flamingo, I could have described the ball across the classroom if I didn't have that word. But the point being is that those are words that are going to much more high frequency, used much
than
more
just
often.
flamingo.
Exactly. And so what I'm getting to is that regardless of what level it's at, if we're prompting and cueing appropriately, we can do this. But it, when we talked earlier about it being seamless, if I've got someone that's saying, hey, we need to program this or program that, or, beyond some of those individualized family members and friends and things like that, my gosh, do I need to be programming all that vocabulary? How many times is this kid gonna see a flamingo? You and I would have in Miami, but the point being is that, like, most of our students, at least here in Arizona, you're not gonna run into a flamingo too often.
And you're gonna get more bang for your buck too, I think, spending your time modeling this and training like your instructional assistants or paraprofessionals, depending where you're at, to use that same sort of cueing. So then when you're not in there the 30 minutes a week, that they're using that same kind of modeling, that same language, and prompting throughout other lessons
And
during
honestly,
the week.
I think in this day and age, it's harder to teach that than it is to teach the technical part or the programming. I'll teach you the technical and the programming part on most of these devices in, literally a matter of minutes. But training ourselves to prompt and cue and not just ask for that block there, but maybe give me a color, maybe a shape and a size, number of blocks. Wow, that's way more impactful for
Training other assistants in the room not to do things for this child.
That would be nice.
That's a huge one too.
Process versus product.
Right.
Yeah.
How about that? Yeah, we end up with, well, we want this completed art project, but we miss all of those communicative opportunities in there. And they don't have to be big things. Sabotaging the environment still works for our AAC kids, so they can't reach the scissors or reach the glue, and they need to ask for, I need, and be able to say this one, that one, the red one, the big one, the small one.
Yeah. So, okay, and that's where I think I needed to shift my mindset a little bit, is to focus more on that, because what I would tend to do is I'm a huge fan of literacy-based therapy, and so I would have my book. And so, of course, there's going to be a lot of fringe vocabulary in that book, right?
Yes.
So there's going to be words, and I'm like, that word's not in there. So how am I going to work around it? Because I'm not sure how he's going to answer me with this device because that word's not in there. But that's not what I should have. Why was I trying to get those words from him? We should have just been talking about what was happening in the story and checking comprehension of what the activity or the story. And so I think I needed to shift my mindset.
How many times do we ask a question, who is doing something?
Right.
And we expect this proper name. She is. What a great carrier phrase. Let's translate that to he is, they are. It is in the case of an animal or something like that. But those type of things are super impactful. Now, is it going to happen overnight too? Because that's what we get stuck in also, is we want to see that immediate gratification. But, the students that are using AAC, for the most part, and I'm generalizing here, they need that repetition, they need that practice. A carrier phrase once a week and it changing every day might not be the route to go. But a carrier phrase, a sentence of the day that lasts a week at a time, that might be impactful.
That's a great point to make too.
Well, we've talked about that before, about how just because we get bored with something
Right.
and always want to switch it up, that's for our benefit, not our students.
Right. Yeah.
Our students would love to read the same books over and over
Right.
again.
Yeah.
They watch the same movie. Like even, neurotypical kinds of kids want to watch the same movie 8,000 times.
Well, and I was just thinking, what was oftentimes happening for me is I was just doing this on the fly, and I didn't have enough preparation. And I think this is something that takes a lot of practice. And so I was just sitting here while you're talking thinking, why didn't I lesson plan that out and really think about how I was going to get the most from whatever the curriculum activity was? What am I going to do to try to support this student and get this device, being used in the activity? I should have mapped that out rather than trying to wing it.
Right.
I mean, although I do think even with trial and error, like it's still better for him to see me trying and looking, but still I could have been more prepared.
I think it does. There's a lot to that. And I think it's just for our comfort level as well. But you know what? We're going to make mistakes in therapy as well. I mean, I can't tell you how many times who is that? Oh, jeez. Like, you roll with it. They won't know. But at the same time, I think those were the best learning situations for me, was to then, all right, tell me about this picture. What do you see? Things that are, a little bit more general, a little more open-ended. And then, there's all those supports in between too. I mean, listening to you and talking about lesson planning, when I hear lesson planning, I go to like symbol supports and things like that. And, there's a lot to that. And there's a lot to AAC that I feel like, oh my gosh, we just can't even cover here. I don't know if you can cover it anywhere.
Right.
You're going to write a blog post for us.
I think-
And a book.
You mean a book? Yeah. It's not a
And
blog
do a
post,
video.
book.
And what else?
I think the best teaching comes from you really have these students that are such individuals.
Right.
And you need, if I had this student to represent this strategy and this student to represent this strategy, and eventually we'll bring that all together. But that's kind of it. Again, going back to the same constant that you're still working on language.
Right.
Yeah. You got to shift your mindset a little bit. One thing that I was dying to ask you about for this podcast too was we get some backlash sometimes from parents, because I wanted to talk about the type of students that can be supported by devices. So again, the last podcast episode we did was very much about our students that are maybe nonverbal or have very limited verbal output and intellectual disabilities. But this can also be great for students with apraxia, which our whole last episode was about, students with maybe severe dysarthria or other things that are causing their inability to communicate verbally with us. But we get backlash sometimes from families when we introduce that as an option because they want the child to talk.
Yes.
So how do you handle that?
A lot of times the discussion goes for immediacy, and you look at the goals. We look at the short term, we look at the long term. We have this long-term idea of this student that, he's going to be verbal, and that's fantastic. We're going to work towards that long-term goal. In the meantime, we also need to know that this student is getting what he needs out of curriculum and from social. Let's not forget the social aspects that go along with this, and being able to interact with other students or other family members even. And so that's typically the way that I will address it, is that this is by all means not the be-all, end-all, but this could even be a kickstart for our students that will develop more verbal language later.
Well, it's almost like when you use something like sign language, the most functional output will always prevail.
Absolutely.
Whatever is going to work for that student and be most functional is going to overcome.
What we hear a lot of times is that if we incorporate some AAC, that a student is not going to talk.
No, because
And
they're going to just rely on that now.
Yeah.
They're not going to even try and talk anymore.
And that is completely opposite. As we've been talking about for however long, AAC is not easy. It's not easy for anyone. It's not easy for the student. There's, he's interacting with something that's between him and somebody else as well. It's a longer process no matter what we do. I mean, the goal for me as an AT specialist, especially, is getting a little in the weeds here, but when I'm dealing with someone with physical issues and access issues, the whole goal there is to try to increase speed of communication, right? Well, even with our best communicators who don't have those kind of barriers, it's still a step slower. Trust me, our kids want to talk.
Mm-hmm.
If they could get it out, they will,
Right.
and they will. We put a communication device in front of students who do have verbal language. You will hear them verbalize that the vast majority of the time. In fact, we were working with a student the other day. As a group, the students were using a communication device so that all the students were modeling off each other, but we were also looking at this one specific student. All of the other students, the ones that could verbalize, they hit the apple on a communication device and they said apple. The red flag went up when our student hit the word apple, was totally content with that and sat down. Turns out when you go to ask him about that, he seemed to display some of those apraxic tendencies, and we were getting motor planning problems, and it's like, oh, okay. Here's a kid that, over the long term, we'd love to see him using his voice. In the meantime, we need to make sure that he's continuing to learn, access curriculum, and that he's able to express wants and needs.
Right.
Yeah, and that's what I had a really tough case, and I really struggled with her, and she was going to be moving on to junior high, severely dysarthric, and had some other things going on too. And so you had helped me with her, and we got her a device, and she loved. And so before I don't think we had even really talked to parents, because it was almost, I didn't need permission maybe yet, because we were just going to introduce this to her, see what, if this was something that was even a good option for her. And so we had introduced it to her. Well, she loved it. And mostly because we had shown her how to create entire dialogues of questions to ask her peers and things that she wanted to say. And she used it to write. And we saw just paragraphs from this student that I had never seen before, because she was using it to write stories and tell us things. And so I'm like blown away, right? This is going to be the greatest thing in the world for her. And she could speak, and she did keep speaking, used her voice. And so anyway, when I finally introduced it to the family, they absolutely said no. This is not, we don't want to do this. She will get lazy. We want her to use her voice. We don't want to rely on this. And so I even talked to you, I think, about what can I help to say. And so we gave her a lot of information, but then there was a speech pathologist at home also saying, no, she doesn't need it. She shouldn't be using this device. And so I don't think she has it anymore. And it was a tough one, because I even questioned it. She does use her voice. She can talk. She was just, her intelligibility was so low, and it was very effortful for her to communicate. And so she would do very short responses, even though I knew we could get more from her. Yep. So she was a good candidate, don't you think? Back me up on this, Doug.
No, I'm going to go with you, but I think that brings up an awesome point too, that one of the biggest things that we see from our students, and especially when we're questioning ourselves about that what if, I really look at, and more often than not it's helpful, but do you see frustration in this student?
Right.
Do you see times when they either circumlocute, or they just give up, or they're just not happy about where they are? And I think those are the times when it's like, yeah, you know what, let's explore this. Let's see what we can do here.
Yeah, and if they're wanting to, she was interested in it, and she wanted to use it.
Clearly, that's what's so sad.
It was pretty amazing. I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have forced it on her if she didn't find it a helpful resource. But she did. That was a tough case. But you kind of question, who are these students that need this kind of support and try to get some buy-in. Because again, I didn't need just buy-in from the family, though I needed buy-in from the whole classroom on that. So.
And it sounds like it was going pretty well, because
I
know that we were also working with writing, and again, talking about another point that gets lost as writing being expressive output. That's part of AAC as well. I mean, we've got students who are using their communication systems to write. however you want to do it. Ours happens to be within the Google system, but we've got our students who are writing, saving their messages, and then pasting it into Gmail document or into Gmail and into Google Docs, and actually composing written work. So, and that's what I mean, you know, with AAC being such a gambit, and this individual could do that and could benefit from that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, some of our others, they're not at that level
Right.
yet, but you know, you look at the scope of where, you know, from a single message Big Mac all the way up to our students who are doing writing, composing, social media. It's pretty vast.
The student may not be at that level, but I've seen some really clever teachers taking, you know, I even think of one particular teacher that will take her students' messages and compose it for them to make like a classroom book. So, I mean, there's so much that can be done. It's just kind of expanding
Absolutely.
your scope of what your concept even is of writing,
Absolutely.
what your concept is of expression.
You know who does a lot of awesome stuff with that at a lower level is Caroline Musselwhite.
Yeah.
And she's local here. I mean, she's phenomenal talking about, like, she's got kids doing poetry with communication devices and also scaffolded over different levels. You know, it's easy to talk about our communication devices that have, you know, all of the vocabulary built in, and our kids are navigating it and putting it together themselves. But you know, it's a lot tougher, I think, to work with our
Right.
students who are, you know, what do we do with this student in writing who has, you know, 4 locations on their Cheap Talk, and we want them to participate in this activity.
Mm-hmm.
And she has great ideas for that, including just fill-ins, you know, fill in the blank, and then repetitive line stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
She does a great job and is an incredible resource. So
Yeah. I love this so much. I think this just really ties into like getting past that fear, starting somewhere. I love the trial and error. You know, not being afraid to ask for help, find those supports that are available. I think it's also important. I like look back over things in my career, and I think that's one area I do beat myself up on probably the most, is that I didn't give those supports to children who really needed them, and make sure, you know, that there was buy-in and that they were being used. And I think, oh, where are they now? You know, but it's never too late, right?
absolutely.
Just
Absolutely.
okay.
Especially now with technology and what's available to us, and available at a price that's, you know, when we talk about price, unfortunately with AAC that's something that comes into play, but stuff has become so much more reasonable.
Yes.
And we don't have to break the bank in order to provide,
Right.
you know,
It doesn't have to be
access,
$10,000
that's
anymore.
quality.
No, it doesn't. There's so many great apps out there. Now, we didn't really talk too much about it, but I didn't know, is there something better? I mean, are there things better than others?
You know, from my perspective, and that's the other thing is, you know, going back to that set framework that I always go back to, is like my environment's the school environment and the classroom environment. You know, you can have a whole different discussion on a home environment and what's important there. And of course, I have to do my plug where, yes, of course, we're all working together and going towards the same things. But let's be real, that environment dictates something different.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's not always something better, but it's how it's used in the environment. And for me, in this classroom environment, when I'm dealing with a whole district, I think I touched on this earlier and maybe didn't explain it terribly well, but I'm looking at systems of supports. You know, when we're dealing with hundreds of teachers who have to be trained on communication devices and different language systems, when we have speech pathologists that need to be trained, when we have, you know, different types of picture symbol sets like you were talking about, I'm looking at where is this all coming together and how do we make it so that I can address a student from preschool through high school with maybe supports that are going to be effective not only for the student, I mean, we want to individualize for that student, but also for a teacher, also for an SLP. I think for you guys to learn 2, 3, 4 different language systems, it's not really realistic all the time. Sometimes we're going to have to do it. But if we break it down to core words, if we break it down to, you know, prompting and cueing strategies, that is one part of the system. For me, looking at it across a school district, I want access to that editing software so badly where I can, make printouts on low tech where I can hide and show buttons and, bring a 20 location display down to 10 or 15, but then without much programming be able to pop it back up for this student as their vocabulary expands. I want to be able to move from a 20 location to a 40 location, keeping that same core language and some of that same look to the language system. So I also, when you talk about writing, I need this thing to interact well with our firewalls and what our district does as far as being able to manage all these mobile devices. So
And copy and paste.
absolutely.
Yeah,
So
into other
it's
docs.
so funny that that environment and what you have in that environment really dictates what you can do.
Yeah.
And again, goes back to that it being so individualized. So for me, is there something better? No, there's just something that works.
So I'm thinking no, just based on what you said, iPad apps could be a great solution, right? Because then you are able to do a lot of what you just said with technology and Wi-Fi and interacting the device with other apps, but also they can be customized.
Just don't use your own.
Don't use your
login.
iTunes. But so like something like Cough Drop, something like Touch Chat, right?
Absolutely.
Those are great alternatives. Words for life. Okay.
Absolutely.
They're more affordable too.
And a lot of
They
times
are.
the state
Right.
will buy individuals, they'll buy children the iPad and install an app for them so they can bring it from home.
Yep, and it really depends, and it depends on that student too. One of my things is that, if we're dealing with a student that does have more access issues and physical challenges, you know what, that might be a really good opportunity. Not that you can't do it on a tablet, but going to some of those communication device companies and really looking at something that can be customized for this child.
That's true.
Something that has really good built-in scanning features or things like that, or eye gaze, which is one of those things that people have really
That's
there goes
true.
a touchy subject right there. But you know what? There's an access method, and so it does depend. I think for some of our
So many things to
students,
think
there's
about that way.
there really
Yeah.
are.
Because I had this student with the visual impairment who was on an iPad, and he was doing okay with it, but at some point he was definitely going to need some kind of I just lost it. The grid
grid,
that was
yeah.
visual. I mean that was
Keypad,
tactile.
key guard.
The key guard, right? So that he could remember where the spaces were and have some like textural reference to where he was.
Or maybe he's a student that eventually will be on auditory scanning, and those are
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as much as of course I'm like, oh, every SLP, wow, not every SLP needs to know all of this. I just don't think the population is there, but gosh,
It's maybe
it is
just
great
knowing-
to have those resources, knowing it's out there.
I think it's just knowing like, hey, the potential is endless. You don't have to know all of this, but knowing that if your student has needs, don't just throw up that barrier of I don't know it. Know that there are resources out there and get with people that do know it and
Don't
that can
be
help
afraid
you figure
to
it out.
ask.
Right.
have those
Don't
discussions.
be, yeah.
Because it is a discussion. I don't think any of us
Call
are
Doug.
walking- Yeah.
Yes, we're going to post his phone number on this podcast.
1-900.
It's a different kind of number. But yeah, it's a discussion and it's a team. It's parents, it's the student, it's the teacher, the SLP. With our access kids, we're bringing in OTs. I mean, it truly is a discussion. There really shouldn't be like, oh, I walk in. Well, obviously, I know what you need here.
Yeah. And don't you think, these are the things I wish I knew sooner, but don't you think a family and a team would rather hear you say, I am not an expert in this, but I am going to do whatever I can to help your student, and I am going to figure it out, and I'm going to go out, find the resources, and ask the right questions, and we will do this together. Versus, yep, I got this, and then I put it on the shelf, and I actually don't do anything with it because it's scary, and I don't actually want to admit that I'm wrong, and I don't want to, go call Doug and ask him to help me.
Give me some time. Let me make a couple
Yeah.
phone calls. I will check back with you at this point. I think about that with a contractor too, even. So yeah, that's the way I would want to be treated, and that's the way that I think our families want to hear that we're working for them.
Yes.
We're supporting them.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah. So many good takeaways today. I think this has been a really helpful episode for a lot of reasons. We've got this theme we didn't even know we were going to have when we did this podcast, which is just that idea of like, we're all learning and it's okay. And, we can't be expected to know everything, but we just have to start and we have to try. And there's help out there. Again, we'll give you Doug's phone number. He's the person to call. We hope everybody has a Doug. But I don't think that's the case. I don't think everybody has a Doug.
I don't know.
Yeah.
For now, we're just happy that you shared your SLP-ness with us.
Lisa's been waiting to say that this entire episode.
NESS. That's all.
We got it.
It's a.
Lisa thinks she's going to coin the term SLP-ness.
Yes. There's not many out there.
I just see graphic tees. Show me your SLP-ness.
That's right. Will you wear one, Doug?
Of course.
We can have 7 made for the 7 male SLPs.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming,
guys.
Doug, for your being brave and stepping into the hot box.
I appreciate it. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. All right. We'll see you guys.
Bye.
Thank you.